All right, guys. Story number 2 is comes to us from NPR. HBCUs, which is historically black universities, universities that have almost predominantly black enrollment, they got a student debt federal fund student loan repayment program, basically a forgiveness program. And look, the important part of the story here is not HBCU, right? The important part of the story is not that the students that got the forgiveness program are from historically black colleges and universities. Now, we could have a very interesting story or a very interesting Scott's thoughts or conversation about what does it look like in the black community to accumulate student debt? How quickly do they pay them off in comparison with Asian students, Hispanic students, white students? That would be a really good conversation. But for this point, I'm just going to talk about government wasteful spending. I don't care if this HBCU said UCLA or all Asian students or all white students. It's just the same wasteful federal spending in an attempt to buy votes. And so I want to immediately dispel that any of this has anything to do with the fact that these forgiveness programs went to a certain type of student or a certain class of people or a certain set of universities. That doesn't matter. And where Fox News will cherry pick stories and kind of Fox News them, I think NPR and CNN and MSNBC does all the same stuff. I don't think they would be running this story of hope and this anecdotal story about this girl and why it's so meaningful for her to have her student loans forgiven and yada, yada, yada. I don't think they would be running this unless there was a class of people, whether that be any minority group, you can pick any minority group, that they're trying to highlight or pick a story or tell a certain narrative, right? And so let's just get rid of HBCUs and just start with erasing student debt with federal funds brings hope for students, right? Well, guess what? If I woke up tomorrow and all of a sudden $7,000, $17,000, $70,000 of debt was like forgiven from me, that would bring me a lot of hope too. If all of a sudden my mortgage was $17,000 lower, $70,000 lower, or my truck is paid off. But if my truck was paid off, that would bring me hope, right? Doesn't matter where you're at in a socioeconomic scale. If somebody just gives you free money, you probably have more help. And so I started reading this article because I thought it looked kind of interesting, mostly because I hate when the government just gives shit away. And it turns out that Wigham School, I don't know if it's pronounced Wigham or Wigham. I think it's Wigham. I think the H is silent. Wigham School got 7,946 students who got CARES funds, right? So then we got to look at what the CARES funds are. But I kept reading. The CARES Act, passed in March 2020, gave $1 billion to HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, specifically, more than 20 of the roughly blah, 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 blah. So basically, the government just gave out $1 billion to pay off student loans. Now, I'm sure there was some fighting between the Democrats and the Republicans. Do these go to all schools? Do these go to historical black colleges and universities? Do these go to underserved minority schools? Do these go to schools that are serving, lower socioeconomic class group of students? Does it go to junior college? See, it doesn't matter. There's probably some big giant fight over this. And my point is that it was in the CARES Act, right? It was in the CARES Act. So I did a little bit more reading about the $1 billion in emergency aid that's going to so-and-so. And we quickly go from $1 billion to we spent $12 billion. By the way, $12 billion, $12 billion, bigger than any annual budget the government has ever released. $12 billion to go to corona-related stimulus. Actually, double check that. I think I misspoke, because I think the budget, the entire U.S. budget for 2020, I don't know, I think it was $6 trillion. So I just totally made that up. Sorry, fact check myself. $12 billion, corona-related virus. Yeah, I was thinking trillion. I mistaked billion and trillion. And by the way, trillion is 1,000 billion. These numbers are so big, you can't even comprehend them sometimes. I can't comprehend them often. Okay, so $12 billion in corona-related stimulus funding went. And so let's go to the CARES Act, right? Because somehow $1 billion got dispersed in emergency aid to colleges. I'm going to take out the HBC or the HBCU because that part doesn't matter. I don't care about that. And other colleges like TCU that serve primarily minority institutions, that they were serviced as well. So again, it doesn't matter who it went to. The fact is that it went at all. So if you go to the CARES Act and you can look up, you just go to congress.gov and you can look up any bill that's ever been passed by the Congress or the Senate, right? And so you see here, this is the Senate bill, which then got revised. Then it went back to the House of Representatives, and then the House of Representatives passed this into law. Oh my goodness, I can't believe this. Almost 18 months ago, March of 2000 is when the first, I think this was $3 trillion, $3 billion. Gosh, I keep messing up trillion and billion. I'm going to lose all my, my street cred here if I keep messing those up. I think it was $3 billion went out in, maybe you can see that. What was the total funding for the CARES Act, Chris? So you can go to the HR bill that was passed into law. You can go to the Senate bill, which then you could actually compare the two if you were really bored and see what the revisions are. You can see the full text, the summary, whatever the case may be. So let's just go to the full text of HR 748 of the 116th Congress, the CARES Act that got passed into law. And what I first did, because what was funny, is I was first looking at the Senate version of the bill. So you just go Control F. First, I like to double check that like it's actually searching the whole text of the bill. So I'll put in something like government, or another word that shows up often is the Treasury. So you can see, like, you can make sure, first of all, that your Control F is actually searching the entire scope of the bill, which you can see how long this is. I mean, these bills are hundreds of pages, if not thousands of pages. So I accidentally went to the Senate bill because I forgot that the Senate made some revisions and then the House actually passed it. And I just looked up, okay, college. Not a single mention of college. What about university? Not a single mention of university. What about education? Okay, so we've got a lot of educational provisions. These are emergency grants, continuing education, national emergency education waivers, and here you go, HBCU capital financing. Now, let's just, to make sure we're doing the right thing here, let's go to the bill that was actually passed into law, because there is a lot of changes that happen in between. Okay, so there is some HBCU capital financing. HBCU capital financing in general, notwithstanding any provisions of Title III, higher education, yada, 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 yada. And it will tell you right here what the plan was, right? Capital financing, right? That sounds like, capital financing. Maybe we're trying to capitalize COVID tests, or infrastructure is the new big thing in the bill that was just passed, right? And it talks all about what we shall not do, what we shall do. I mean, these bills are just overwhelming, but you can read them. And I recommend you do if you have a particular problem with something that you see on Fox News or MSNBC about how money was spent. And it just talks about where this is all appropriated. And it's like, what the fuck does this have to do with COVID? What does forgiving student loans have to do with securing the country and a public health issue and a pandemic? It has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. And this is just another example of a government boondoggle. You can probably guess which party put this section in there to buy what type of demographic of votes. And it's just buying votes with our own money. And this is just one small example. I'm sure we could go. Did you find the total spending on government spending and then the CARES Act? I think CARES was $3 billion.
So I'm at hhs.gov,
Mm-hmm.
and there were 3 phases. The first phase was $46.02 billion. The second phase was $5.98 billion. And the third phase was $24.5 billion.
So we're at about $80 billion in COVID relief. And what was the total federal budget for 2020?
That was 6.6 trillion.
6.6 trillion. So it's like about 1% to 2% of the budget. What's 80 billion divided by 6 trillion?
I don't know.
Hey Google. Hey Google. What's 80 billion divided by 6 trillion?
The answer is approximately 0.01
times 100. So it's like 1%. Like 1% of the budget went to 1% of the budget went to COVID. Okay. Seems like it should have been more. Anyway, my point is, again, I don't care whether or not the government and the taxpayers and citizens decide that we want to fund higher education. That's probably plenty of arguments in favor of that. I don't care if there was a longer discussion, maybe that one day we'll have on this podcast, that there's a reason to favor certain types of colleges or certain types of educational institutions. That's probably a fair conversation. But for it to sneak its way into a COVID relief bill is just crazy. And I just want Americans to understand that these politicians suck. And all they care about is getting into power and staying into power. There's a great book called The Dictator's Handbook that was written by, who is this written by? I'm going to look this up. Dictator's Handbook. I think it was a professor from Stanford. Dictator's Handbook. There we go. Why bad behavior is almost always good politics. Excellent book. And I think Bruce is a professor of politics at New York University and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, which is at Stanford. So he probably teaches at both. And then Alistair, he does not have there he is. No, he does not have an author's page. Well, that's a bummer. Maybe he was just an editor or something. So great book, how it talks about politicians, all of their bad behavior, all of their kickbacks, all their special interest spending, all the gluttonous amount of money that they're using to put us into massive amounts of debt as a country. It's good politics, right? Because they know that they're just carving out all these little special interest groups and they're buying your votes with your money. Remember, there is no such thing as government spending. There is no such thing as government spending. There is government takes money from taxpayers, or they take money from corporations, or they make things more expensive for us through fees and license requirements. And then they spend that money back on us to buy votes for themselves. It's crazy. It's crazy. And you got to look at things with a skeptical eye and an analytical eye when you start thinking things like, I don't know, we're just going to spend $80 billion. And does anybody really feel, other than the fact that a vaccine got developed at rapid pace and probably a scientific miracle with a lot of government funding, does anybody really feel like the government's done a whole lot to make the situation a whole lot better over the last 18 months? I think most people would disagree. So those are my thoughts on the Dictator's Handbook and how we're just wasting a glut of money in these stupid COVID bills.